So, hi there, thank you for coming out. Welcome to SAS. As David mentioned, last year I came up here and I talked about a new APT, and this time I am up here to talk to you about Stalkerware and Spouseware. So this is going to be a much less technical and sort of policy influenced talk. I always feel a little bit guilty if I get up here and I don't actually have a new APT for you. So, we begin by traveling back to 2017, or as we call it, the before time. So, at the end of 2017, I discovered that a security researcher with whom I had been publishing research for many years was a serial rapist. And at the beginning of 2018, an article was published in which one of his victims specifically said that one of the reasons why she had not come out and said anything about it was that he was a security professional and that he had threatened to compromise her devices, and so she felt really powerless and scared. Well, I was a little mad, and I did what any reasonable person would do when they're catastrophically angry, which was I tweeted. And what I tweeted was, if you're a woman who has been sexually abused by a hacker who threatened to compromise your devices, contact me, and I will make sure that they're properly examined. And I thought that this was no big deal. I thought that maybe I would hear from like one or two people, maybe half a dozen people. I'd help like a couple of people. I would feel good about myself. I would sort of cover that nobody ever has to feel that scared again feeling. I was wrong. 9,400 retweets later, I appear to have accidentally started a project, and I'm spending all of my time desperately fighting not starting a new NGO, which is the most popular pastime among people who work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We are activists whose hobby is also activism. I heard from a lot of people. I got somewhere between 0 and 12 contacts a day. There were definitely some months where things calmed down a little bit and I was able to do, other work. But for the most part, I heard from people almost every day contacting me via email and on Twitter and for some strange reason on Instagram and via, Facebook Messenger, carrier pigeon, all the usual things. And I heard from mostly women, and the abusers were mostly men, but I would like to make it clear that there were cases of women abusing men, and also that there were cases of abusive same-sex couples. For example, one of the men who came into my office and had me take a look at his devices and review all of his accounts was a man whose abusive partner had, among other things, outed him as gay to his extremely conservative Korean family. So, one of the biggest problems that I encountered when people started contacting me left and right is that it turned out I was wrong about what people needed. This is not unusual. It's really common for people like me to come, barreling into a situation going, you need forensics. It turns out, no, they didn't need forensics. Most people couldn't distinguish between a device compromise and a compromise of their account, because that's just not one of those things that comes up in ordinary people's lives. They also couldn't distinguish between a real threat and a scam. There is an extremely common scam going around in the last year of people receiving emails saying, I have installed a rat on your computer, I have pictures of you masturbating, and I am going to send these pictures of you and your masturbation to everyone in your contacts list unless you send Bitcoin. This is bullshit, it never happens, you can freely delete that. And boy was I happy that many of the people who I was contacting were really easy to help in that way. But I also got a lot of people with account compromise. Their email accounts were compromised, Google Drive accounts were compromised, Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, Snapchat accounts, Instagram accounts, WhatsApp, Apple ID. If it has a login, it was compromised. I saw a whole lot of that. And the nice thing about sort of login compromise and account compromise is that I know what to tell people. We have solutions for that. So what I did was I wrote up a little email, and I explained that if you are worried about account compromise, what you do is you go and you look to see what devices have been logging into your account. You use strong, unique passwords. You use a password manager. You need to be careful with your security questions, especially if you're worried about an attacker who knows you very well and can guess the answers to your security questions. And use the highest level of two-factor authentication that is feasible for you. There are people in this room who will quibble with this advice, who will say that 2FA is bad. There will also be people who say that unless you're using a token, why do you even bother? And I advocate for the harm reduction approach, which is use as much security as I can get you to use. If I gave the people who came to me advice to do things that they then did not do, then all I'm doing is making myself feel good for giving such good advice, and I'm not actually helping them. But sometimes it really is a rat. And those were actually a lot of the most heart-wrenching experiences. A lot of the times the people who came to me were terrified. A lot of this tracking went hand in hand with physical abuse, threats, blackmail. The abuser frequently had physical access to their devices, and the abuser was able to guess or compel the victim to give up their passwords. It was extremely common to talk to people who had their accounts compromised in the most straightforward way. I told him what my password was. He said that if I loved him, that I would share my email password and that I would have nothing to hide from him. And now all of these bad things are happening to me. Now, I see only a small fraction of the sort of infections that we see in the wild. And one of the reasons for that is that I was using a self-selecting sample. I was talking only to people who were being threatened. And I discovered something really interesting, which is that the kind of hackers who threaten their victims with a rat are usually full of shit. They don't install a rat on anyone's device because if they did, they'd stay quiet in order to maintain their access. Usually the threat was just a way of keeping their victim in line, keeping them cowed, and unable to understand the size and shape of the surveillance that they were facing. They got what they wanted without ever having to install a rat. Hackers are lazy. But there were also situations in which I encountered victims who had rats installed on their devices, on their iPads, on their phones, on their PCs. And they came to me pretty much every day. And I did sort of a combination of first responder, therapist, hand-holder, threat analyst thing, and it was not particularly great for my mental health. Now, we call this in activism, we refer to this as the hero model. Everything goes through me. I get to feel extremely heroic and smug because I'm helping people. I get fancy profiles in Wired in which I look off into the distance heroically. And it's bullshit. This doesn't scale. This is not sustainable. And it will only drive you crazy. So I'm here to tell you, kill your heroes. Just kill them right now. So, in addition to not being that technical, I am also extremely lazy. So I didn't want to continue doing this sort of frontline tech support for people telling me the worst thing that had ever happened to them day after day after day. And I started to think about how I could get more bang for the buck, how I could make a bigger difference without having to individually help people one by one, or as we call it, thought leadership. So I have a device for people with compromised accounts, But the worst abuses that I was seeing were the result of compromised devices, mostly Android phones, running spouseware and stalkerware. This sort of software is really prevalent, and it's tempting. Phones are juicy targets for abusers for exactly the same reason that they're juicy targets for APTs. Your phone gives away your location, your emails, your text messages, your WhatsApp messages, your photos, your Snapchats, your Instagram messages, your web browsing, your searches. Your phone is basically an extension of your mind. And that is extremely useful for abusers in the same way that it's extremely useful for nation states. So, how do we know it's spouseware? This is actually way easier than finding samples of, APTs. You Google it. All you really need to do is go Google, how can I spy on my husband's cell phone? How do I spy on my wife's cell phone? And see who's buying these ads. Who is positioning themselves in this SEO. This is a product. It has to sell. Somebody has to aim it at people. So that actually makes this job way, way easier than what I usually do. This is a screenshot from a product called CocoaSpy. Again, they will tell you they're spouseware. The website says, access to CocoaSpy gives you the lead on how to spy on your wife with ease. You do not have to worry about where she goes, who she talks to, or the websites she visits. This is particularly endearing. This is a archived screenshot from HelloSpy. It is an entire page on how useful HelloSpy is for catching your cheating spouse. And as you can see, there is a picture of a man holding a woman who's looking away with a bruised and bloody face. And I want you to understand that HelloSpy is on the side of the abuser in this picture. That is the entire point of the product. You can be that blonde dude catching your cheating wife, giving her a shiner. Good work. And honestly, the hacker community has played along with this. In 2012, this is Jean-Pierre Le Sur, shut down his rat project called Dark Comet. And the reason that he shut it down was someone, me, and also some other people, wrote over a dozen reports about it being used by pro-Assad hackers in Syria against the opposition. Wired coverage was hilariously sympathetic. The title that they used for their article on him was "How the Boy Next Door Accidentally Built a Syrian Spy Tool." And what he said was, I never imagined that this product would be used by governments. And what he didn't say was, I was totally fine with it being used by abusive husbands and other actors with the blonde guy in the previous shot. So for a very long time, we've thought that this sort of thing was really okay. Again, how can you tell it's spouseware? Deception is the key. There are lots of products that you can use to keep an eye on your employees, to keep an eye on your children, even to keep an eye on your spouse. But what I'm particularly concerned about are products that are designed to run on a device covertly. And yes, I mean that even if you have the phone's password or their Apple ID credentials. I would not equate that to consent, especially in these abusive situations where people are compelled to hand over their login credentials. And right now, we're doing a lousy job of detecting these products. It's not particularly hard to signature spouseware, but as you can see here, as I revved up a copy of VirusTotal, what we have here is a detection of 7 out of 60 products. I think this is CocoaSpy. Slightly better, 10 out of 61, recognizing the truthspy.apk. So we're doing a lousy job. So last week, Kaspersky decided that maybe they should do something about this, and they made an announcement saying that they were going to make a change to the way that they treat spouseware. And not only are they going to recognize spouseware in their AV product, but they've decided to change the way in which the alert comes up. So the new alert looks like this. This is a privacy alert. It specifically calls out the spouseware as malicious. And that's one of the things I would really like to see other antivirus companies doing. One of the interesting things that the Kaspersky announcement says quite explicitly is that these products are legal. And in some cases, they are legal. Again, it depends on where you are. It depends on what the law is and how it is being used and how they're being advertised. But what there's no question about in my mind is that these products are unethical. It is not up to the AV industry to make calls about what is legal or illegal, and if it's legal, we leave it alone. We have an ethical obligation to mark these products as malicious. Antivirus should not automatically remove this product because victims should have a choice about whether or not they wish to alert their abusers that they know they're under surveillance. The abuser may escalate to violence, and our first duty, I say, having stolen this directly from doctors, is to first do no harm. For people who don't feel comfortable installing Kaspersky's products, and let me tell you, my Twitter feed is full of these people right now, all I can say is that other companies should catch the hell up so that I can recommend some alternatives. So, AV is not the only actor in this area. There are some things that Google can do. In my survey of spouseware, I noticed that some of it still shows up in the Google Play Store, even though products that monitor surreptitiously and that are designed to be covert on your phone are, I think, against their terms of service, so they're supposed to remove them. I have a sort of crazy pie-in-the-sky vision for something that Apple can do, which is that I see that a lot of the spouseware for iOS depends on jailbreaks, and it would be nice if Apple could find a way to alert users when their phone has been jailbroken, so it cannot be done covertly. I understand that this is not a small or trivial ask, and that it may turn out not to be possible. This is, can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it kind of problem. But I do think that it is something that Apple should look into. I've also seen that the Apple products have really moved away from jailbreaks, since I think the last untethered jailbreak was like, I don't know, iOS 9 something. Since they've moved away from that, what they have moved towards is picking up old copies of iCloud backups. So encrypting those would be a really great idea by default. And then there's the question of what governments can do. So very frequently, one of the things that I hear when something goes wrong is, there ought to be a law. And as a member of a digital civil liberties organization, I'm often skeptical of this. I don't usually think that we need a lot of new laws. What we really need is to start enforcing some of the laws that we already have. This next bit of analysis is US-based, and this is because EFF is a t-shirt and sticker organization with a law firm attached. And when all you have is a hammer, all your problems start to look like nails, and all I have is a floor of angry US attack lawyers. And so all of my answers look a lot like legal analysis for the US market. So there are some laws that are being broken, including the Federal Wiretapping Act, the Stored Communications Act, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. One thing that I want to make clear, because I'm not sure that there will be time to discuss these things in detail, is that EFF frequently fights the misuse of these laws. Code is speech. And EFF fought to make sure that code is recognized as speech in the United States, and we are no less committed to that position now than we were last week or the week before. Code is still speech. I continue to defend the rights of security researchers and the rights of hackers. I continue to defend the right of people to tinker with the things that they bought, that they own. But your right ends at a certain point, and that point is the creation of malicious software that you then sell specifically for the purpose of breaking the law. That's really where my sympathy kind of fizzles out. As you can see here, one of the other things that we can do is you can actually go after the companies themselves. I believe did the FTC? The FTC went after Stealth Genie, the cell phone spying and monitoring app, which is why when you go to their page now, you can see that Stealth Genie is no longer available. Some courts have also held that the makers of spyware installed on a computer used to intercept electronic communications and send them to the company's server is itself guilty of the interception under the Federal Wiretapping Act, even though it was an end user, not the company itself, that installed the software. We've also seen a lot of successful prosecutions against companies selling voice recorders, transmitters hidden in pens, light bulbs, wall plugs, and calculators. But prosecutions against purveyors of spyware are pretty rare. One spyware software developer was indicted in 2005, but fled the country. In 2014, Stealth Genie's CEO was indicted and pled guilty and was fined $500,000, which, will put a down payment on a house in San Francisco. Prosecutors have also prosecutions have occurred with respect to end users of spyware. And the end user of a number of spyware programs was indicted and pled guilty in 2014 to both interception of electronic communications and possession of interception devices. So do we involve the FTC? At least in the case of this 2012 case in which the FTC charged Designerware LLC, a company that provided spyware to rent-to-own computer providers, and entered into a consent decree with the company agreeing not to collect data from computers without giving clear and prominent notice and obtaining affirmative consent. Similarly, in 2008, the FTC sued CyberSpy Software, which sold a keylogger program. The company entered into a consent decree with the FTC in 2010 in which it agreed not to promote, sell, or distribute software to be installed on computers without the knowledge and consent of the computer's owner. And finally, there are state laws. Various states in the Union have wiretapping statutes. We have two-party consent, which means that there are certain states in which if you are having a conversation with someone and you are recording it without their consent, it is a violation of their rights. And finally, there's in the state of California, there's the Consumer Protection Against Computer Spyware Act. So we get extra super specific. There's also the matter of whether or not it's okay to spy on your children. So a lot of these parental tracking apps are extremely common as spyware, and a lot of the reason why people say that they need this spyware is because, hey, I own this phone, and these are my kids, and I should be able to keep track of them. But the right of a parent to spy on their kid is not absolute. It has limits. So a lot of states have this belief of vicarious consent. So parents can consent on behalf of their children. But this is a right that has limits. For example, parents found that a parent in a custody battle could surreptitiously record their child's phone conversations with the other parent, where the parent was concerned about abuse of a child, so that's considered to be okay. But the parent has to demonstrate a good faith, objectively reasonable basis for believing such consent was necessary for the welfare of the child. So you can't just run around just spying on your children willy-nilly and having it be legal. Some states interpreting their own wiretapping statutes have limited this consent to situations where there is a specific demonstration of a good faith basis that is objectively reasonable for believing that the minor child is being abused. So, there are a lot of tools that we can use. There are plenty of tools at our disposal. There's a lot that the AV industry can do. There's a lot that individual security researchers can do. There's a lot that governments can do. We've seen that we don't necessarily need new laws. We just need to use the ones that we already have. And the last point that I want to make to you all is that I didn't invent the terms stalkerware or spouseware. The first reference that I was able to find goes back to 2007. People have been doing this work for years. And I think it's extremely important to acknowledge the contributions of people like Harlow Holmes from the Freedom of Press Foundation, who has been doing a lot of this sort of on-the-ground work for a very long time, and also the journalists at Vice's Motherboard, who do a series called When Spies Come Home, that's done a lot to bring attention not only to the spouseware and stalkerware industry, but to the fact that the people who make this this software aren't very good. And so frequently, they end up having very serious data breaches. It's one of those things that's really weird to complain about because it feels like going into a restaurant and saying this food isn't very good and such small portions. But in this particular case, not only is stalkerware bad, but also you can end up with these sort of like Exxon Valdez oil spills of data going on. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge Lorenzo and Joe and Harlow and I think Thomas Brewster at Forbes and all of the other people who came before me, and hope that we can all work together in order to make it so that I never have to give another talk on spouseware or stalkerware again. That's it.